Thank you, Connie. That was awesome. If you're not in awe, you're not paying attention. So did you know some significant anniversaries? Friday was the 135th birthday of Ernest Holmes. Did you know that? Today, my son Joseph turns 24. I know you didn't know that one. And 2 years ago, Saturday, was the first diagnosed case of COVID in the United States, some guy in Seattle, 2 years ago. So with all of those things that have happened, how has your life changed? Well, as far as you know, nothing with my son, but how have you navigated the in-between from when you first started learning about the science of mind and your life now? How has your life changed since that January date 2 years ago and where we are now with COVID? They're very significant events, and we've had to make a lot of changes in all those things that have turned our lives upside down, inside out, tossed it over, and mixed it all up. And we think that we've never seen anything like this in the history, and yet this is simply human experience. If you know Rumi in the 13th century, they had the same issues then. And this is a poem that he wrote. It's called The Guest House, and you may have heard it before. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat every guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Can we think about those 2 years that way? Can we think about our progression in this thing called life that way? If you can, all the time, good for you, because you're a heck of a lot better than I am. The nature of significant change, just can overwhelm us. And yet, you come here Sunday because of at least your exposure to the science of mind or new thought or something along those lines. And the question is, this is a center for spiritual living. And how much of a spiritual life do you have? If you're here on Sunday, and that's all you do, that is some level of spiritual living. If you include meditation and maybe reading the science of mind, that's another level. If you're going to classes, and incorporating that teaching into your life more extensively, that's something else. There's no judgment in any of that. As Ernest Holmes says, there's no mistakes, there's only inevitable consequences, right? And so that's what we have to factor into this, that we're on a journey and we're doing the best we can wherever we're at. Be that as it may, traditionally, science of mind centers for spiritual living throughout this country, at the beginning of the year, many centers revisit the first 4 introductory chapters of the Science of Mind textbook. The thing itself, the way it works, what it does, and how to use it. Being as that we are at the 4th week, we're going to take a look at how to use it. So the question is, how's it going? How are you using it? Ernest Holmes says this: Through spiritual discernment, we see that we have within us a power which is greater than anything we shall ever contact, a power that can overcome every obstacle in our experience. To what extent do we buy into that? What it requires is to be in close contact with this indwelling presence. So as you think about any challenge in your life, the COVID experience, any in between, how have you maintained that indwelling presence? Or haven't you? So if we're asking how to use it, how are you using it? Now that may surprise you that you're always using it, right? Whether you're aware of using it or not, you're always using it. One of the things that I really liked when I first came to the Science of Mind was picking up the textbook and looking at those first 4 chapters and how it described the thing itself. It got away from this concept of God, which for me, raised as a Catholic, was extremely freeing. I didn't have to worry about that. I could think about it in terms of an it, which was tremendous in my opinion. So some of you are Star Wars fans. The Honorable Obi-Wan Kenobi said this when he was asked, what is the Force? And he said, the Force is the thing that gives a Jedi his power. It surrounds us, penetrates us, and binds the galaxy together. Isn't that a perfect description of what we're talking about? The thing itself. Now, what that means is, in order to be a Jedi, to face Darth Vader, or whatever your greatest challenge may be, to become a Master Jedi requires what? It requires the same thing as to get to Carnegie Hall, which is practice, 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 right? That's the only way it works. So if you have something that is overwhelming in your life, what's the quality of your spiritual practice? Again, there's no mistakes, they're just inevitable consequences. The challenge that I find today is something that Ernest Holmes said himself as he was looking at what was happening with the Science of Mind. And he said, one of the great difficulties in the new order of thought is that we are likely to indulge in too much theory and too little practice. So I think that's very resonant with what's happening today. We get into the theory, the concept of things, in addition to the Science of Mind. 2 years ago, a week before COVID, Donald Trump was going through the whole impeachment thing. And everybody that you knew was an expert in constitutional law. Wasn't it amazing? Everybody knew everything about what was going on. And a month and a half later, everybody was an expert in pandemic and virology. We spend so much time in concepts that we don't take the time to really practice what is in front of us. So we raise the question again, then how are you using it? Is it just a conceptual thing for you? And the way that you can tell is you can tell by whatever's around you at this time. That will tell you how you're using it. So it brings up one of the most sensitive issues, I think, in the teaching of Science of Mind. And that is the one of metaphysical guilt. Are you familiar with that one? Let me preface it by saying this. The commercial for Capital One says, "What's in your wallet?" So have you ever heard that applied to the Science of Mind? What's in your consciousness? Right? What's in your consciousness? Which is something that you should never say to anyone. One of my first introductions to that was in a class where someone came in with a broken arm, and they didn't hear the end of it, not from me, but, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? The person never came back. They never came back because we're not mindful about this. Another experience for me was when I was going through the ministerial intensive, And that's a week before you can become licensed to be a minister. So they put you through a week of education, and then at the end of the week, they have a panel of other ministers that take you through what they think is important to see if you know what you need to know. And so that whole week was, as it is named, very intense. And it was on top of everything that was happening. There was my partner that came with me to be licensed. We were sitting at a Starbucks in Monterey, and he suddenly doubled over in pain. And you know, I think we had walked there, but I didn't know what to do. We ended up calling an ambulance, and this was like the day before I was going to be tested. And there was a car crash involved, and a lost child, and all sorts of things. But the bottom line was, when I went in for my intensive, they said, well, how's your week been? And I told them what was happening. And the first thing one of them said is, well, what were you thinking? So I can be kind of a smartass sometimes. And I said, well, clearly I wasn't thinking. But I was doing treatment. And I guess that was enough to pass me. I had someone else as a minister that came for counseling. And he was a friend, and he said, you know, there's just some things that I don't understand. Like, how can I be first cause to my experience? And I said, that's a great question. What are you referring to? Well, he was in a sling because he had had a shoulder operation because he had dislocated his shoulder, and it was beyond anything that they could just use therapy for. You needed an operation. So I said, well, tell me what's happening. And he said, well, you know, I went skiing, and I ended up, you know, having to have shoulder surgery. And that is not what I was thinking. It was not what I intended. And I said, yeah, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? And he said, yeah, it really made me angry, given what you're teaching. I said, well, tell me more. And so he just described what had happened. And so I asked him, well, so you're telling me that this is the first time you've skied? And he said, yes. I had fooled around as a kid, but this is the first time I'd gone skiing as an adult. And I said, you had previously dislocated your shoulder, right? And he said, yes, I did. And so you decided to go skiing? And he said, yes, I did. And so you started out on the bunny hill, and then you decided to go onto the intermediate hill? And he said, yes. And I said, so who made all of these decisions? And he said, I get it. And I said, I'm not sure you do. Think about the choices that you had at each step along the way. That's where the meat is. That's where the juice is. There's no judgment on any of those things. There's just inevitable consequences. And he got it. And he got it. That's where we have to re-look at how we teach the science of mind, because the guilt trip doesn't help anyone. And it really needs to change. And I think it is, but I'm not sure, because I haven't talked to a lot of ministers about how they're teaching it or their students to see how it's working for them. So it's just something to really pay attention to, not only with yourself and to be gentle with yourself, but with anyone else. There's something that we need to learn there that goes deeper than the science of mind, and that is how we interact with one another. So the question is then, are you willing to be a channel for the full fulfillment of purpose in yourself? You're not here for a better job. You're not here for more money. You're not here for a better house, a better relationship, whatever it is. All of those things are important, but you're here to evolve your consciousness. You're here to do that. That's all that matters. Now, we are human, and those other things do take on importance. And we may not be thinking all the time about living a spiritual life, but that's why we're here. There are better questions that we can ask ourselves about the nature of our spiritual living. and the fulfillment of our purpose. So I was talking to a good friend of mine. She's a minister, and she's been a trooper through this whole thing. She's immunocompromised. She got vaccinated. She got COVID. She's always been masked up. She does everything that everybody's supposed to do. And like everybody else, she goes grocery shopping. So she's telling me this story. She went grocery shopping, got all her stuff, and she's putting away the frozen food. So she takes a bag of vegetables and kind of tosses it in, and it slides back out. She tosses it in again, and a couple of other bags start sliding out. And so she tried to push them in there, and all of a sudden, everything started falling out. And she lost it and tore everything out of the freezer onto the floor, and she had a meltdown. And she started to weep, and then suddenly she had a realization that this is the COVID experience, right? That we do our best to gather things up and put them in the right places, and despite our best intention, sometimes things just fall apart. And there doesn't have to be a judgment on that in terms about what was she thinking about. But she realized as she was weeping that there were tears of relief, that it had all finally come out. She had tried to tough it out, right? And unconsciously created this tension that is not sustainable. You see how this works? That's the way that it works, and that's how you use it, is to transform the meltdown into something that was creative, that gave her a sense of understanding her place in the evolution of consciousness, what was actually happening. Isn't that a great story? I don't want that to happen to me. But, it happens in its own way, with other things. She saw the perfection as a mirror of what was happening in her life. There's much to learn there. A deeper practice in the new order of things is developing a greater sense of inquiry, curiosity, into everyday spiritual living. What does it mean to be alive, to be spiritual in every moment? Whatever that takes, what kind of practice it takes. I don't know what it takes for you. But it's a consistent, persistent willingness to look at who we have come here to be and what's happening in our lives. Our job is to recognize images of limited thought that may incidentally or chronically arise in our lives, something that keeps coming up all the time. It's an invitation to look at that. Why am I triggered by that? Or why does this person trigger me all the time into anger, hate, whatever it is? That's not about them. It's about us going deeper, inquiring about why is that trigger there. Our job is to root out the ways that we habitually deceive ourselves about what's happening. Root out the ways that we habitually deceive ourselves, because it's happening all the time, no matter what we may think. So that's the opportunity to change our thinking. And most importantly, is to do it privately, right? Or with a practitioner. My teacher, Kennedy Schultz, gave me the 11th commandment, which was mind your own business. And there's something to be said for that. But at the same time, if we want to engage, because that's where we learn, is engaging with other people, then we have to develop the emotional, spiritual, mental intelligence to sit and listen and to be vulnerable and to not give advice, but simply ask, how can I support you where you're at right now? And they may ask you, how can I use the science of mind for this? That's one of the biggest lessons I learned in working with my son, was to listen to him. Stephen Covey says, you cannot begin talking to your children by telling them your autobiography. Back when I was your age, how many times have we tried that as a concept for raising children? We listen to their story. We validate their feelings. And magically, what may happen is they might say, what would you do, Dad, Mom? Then you've gotten through to them. Let them tell you what they need. But that means listening. And that means the same thing with whoever's in front of us. We are all experiencing the same thing. The person across from us is simply a mirror with what's going on inside of us. That may be a hard thing to do, especially with those people that are hard to love. But that's our job. What is it? Mother Teresa said something to that effect, that the most disturbing thing was to see the face of Jesus in the most unpleasant circumstances. That can be a hard thing to do. When I look at the in-between on the most significant of those three things that I talked about, COVID, Ernest Holmes' birthday, and my son's birthday, the most impactful thing for me was my son's birthday, or my son's birth. You go through different stages in the in-between, from before he was born to the birth, and then, say, 6 years. Tremendous change in that period of time. And the first stage is to think, well, I can do this. I can do this. I can keep my business going without too much of an impact. Reverend Kath can keep doing church, and we'll just figure it out. And so there's a certain level of denial going on that things won't change. And then the birth comes, and it's like, I didn't expect this. And here's a caution to any of you that have ever been in a delivery room: do not try and make jokes. Kath was in the delivery room and going through her contractions, and she developed a cramp in her calf on her left side. And I could almost see the nurses going, no, no, no. And I said, at least that'll take the pain away from you thinking about the pain of the contraction. And if she had Superman vision, I would be a pile of ash. So guys, another opportunity to just keep our lips closed in the delivery room. So the other stage of once the child is born and having to see that you can't do things the way you've always done them, there comes a certain loss of momentum. Morale may drop. There may be depression. How am I going to keep my business going? I can't even get any sleep. We can't keep, doing things the way we've done them. So there's a disorientation. So it's important to recognize that it's not just about change. It's about acknowledging the stages that you're going through as you're going through the experience. It's one thing to manage the change, but it's another thing to pay attention to what's going on emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. That's how we use this. The other part of that in-between is, with all those problems and challenges, if we can pay attention to and admit to those feelings, it frees us up to have tremendous creativity that comes out of that, of figuring out how to not only survive those early years, but thrive. And that takes a lot of work. I have 2 prayer partners that I've had for 20 years because I need all the help I can get. And this is something that I really encourage you, is to find a prayer partner, somebody that you can go to and be vulnerable with, and get the support that you need. Okay? The third stage is where the energy is freed up. My son and I now have a wonderful relationship. We can talk about anything because he trusts me based on what had happened growing up. And that just fills my heart. I'm just so happy to celebrate his life today for the wonderful young man that he's become. It doesn't mean there still aren't problems, and believe me, there are problems. But he's gainfully employed and, he's living on his own, so what more can you want for a kid? So I guess what I'd like you to think about is, where are you in between? Okay? So you have an opportunity in the life of your church here. You're in between what has happened in the past and what may come in the future. Can you really explore what those feelings are? Have you explored what those feelings are? Or are you just waiting to change? You're managing, you're hoping that everybody knows what they're doing and we'll end up with another minister. Well, part of the challenge of that is, if you haven't looked at, how you felt about this center and what's going on and what's progressing, that can simply be carried on to the next minister if we haven't done our work. You see, it's not just about the work that the interim is doing or that the wonderful people that are on the board and the practitioners and all of those people, the work that they're doing. It requires each of us to do work as well, to make the way clear for whatever is to come. And there can be a lot of innovation and creativity and wonderful things unfolding. Or, in terms of COVID, is there a challenge there that you really haven't addressed? Like the peas falling out of the freezer. Is there stuff going on that you haven't really paid attention to? Yes, you may have managed well. There may have been a lot of creativity in your work environment or, all of the things that you've done. But have you ignored something that's going on at a deeper level? Or is there another personal issue in your life that is really unresolved? You may be managing the changes that are happening, but are things there that emotionally and mentally and spiritually that really you haven't shared with anyone? Because that may be the very place where you can come up with new ideas for what's going on in your life right now. So I encourage you to do that, is to take a deep look at what's happening. And if you'd like to explore some of that in the workshop that follows this, then we're going to do a little bit of that work there, at least introduce you to some of these concepts. The major piece here is to remembering that my mind, your mind, is a center of divine operation. You're the ones that are calling the shots. There's a power for good in this universe, and we can use it for good if we focus on who we are, who we have come here to be. And it is filled with possibility and opportunity to live a life beyond your imagination, because you're wonderful and so am I, and so it is. Thank you.